engineering and capital equipment industries who are here present, and all of you distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure for me to be here with you this morning and to join you for this presidential breakfast. We don't have a presidential breakfast at the Union Buildings, so it's a real pleasure and honor to be invited for breakfast. I usually don't have breakfast. I don't know what you're going to offer. For more than 80 decades, your organization and the industries that it represents have been at the heart of South Africa's industrial development. You have really been the backbone and the base, as you call it, of the industry. Our mines, the structures that carry our electricity, the equipment that moves goods through our various roadways and railways, and the components that keep our factories operating. So in more ways than one, your industry plays a critical role in the industrial development of our country and indeed in the economy of our country. You produce the transformers, the cables, the pumps, the valves, the boilers, the fabricated steel, the mining equipment and engineering systems without which a modern economy simply cannot function. With more than 1,300 members, SEIFSA represents an industrial capability of immense strategic importance to our country. When one travels around the world, and indeed on our continent especially, you do not find a resource as powerful as you are as SEIFSA. Yes, maybe in the Northern Hemisphere you do, and in the East you do. So you are an important key role player in the economy of our country. That capability matters particularly now, because our country is entering one of the most important periods of infrastructure investment and economic reform since the advent of democracy. Our task is to ensure that this investment does more than build infrastructure. It must rebuild the South African industry itself. Every transmission line that we aim to build, every railway we want to rehabilitate, and every port we intend to expand, and every water system we construct should contribute to the expanding productive capacity of our economy. Lines by 14,000 kilometers. So we are now more infrastructure focused. We must use this infrastructure program to create factories, to develop skills, to strengthen supply chains, and to support new industrialists and create jobs. This is the opportunity before us, but we must also acknowledge the difficult conditions under which South African manufacturers are operating. The metals and engineering sector has demonstrated extraordinary resilience over many years. Yet companies continue to face weak domestic demand, logistics constraints, high electrical costs or electricity costs, infrastructure bottlenecks, and growing import competition. That's what you face. Globally, steel demand remains fragile in many countries. Excess global steel-making capacity continues to grow, placing enormous pressure on producers around the world. Geopolitical tensions, disruptions to supply chains, and volatility in energy prices are also adding further uncertainty to the efficacy of your industry. South African companies feel these pressures directly, and I think you feel them more in your own businesses. Investment decisions are delayed, margins are squeezed, factories operate below capacity, and ultimately jobs are placed at risk. We cannot accept the continued erosion of South Africa's industrial base. We have seen it play out in front of our own eyes. It's rather a sad sight as you go through various of our towns that were like the industrial hubs of our country, not only here in Gauteng, but also elsewhere. And when you see big structures that have become derelict. The other day I was in Mpumalanga and I happened to go past what used to be Highveld Steel and just saw these massive buildings that have now become derelict and no longer really pumping or functioning. It's a sad sight. Manufacturing is not simply another sector of the economy. It is the fundamental center of our economic sovereignty. It generates skills, it drives innovation, it supports exports, it creates productive employment, and it sustains thousands of businesses throughout the economy. When we boast that we are the most industrialized country on the continent, it is this sector that you represent that we are essentially boasting about. That is why government is working with business and labor to address the structural constraints that have held our economy back. 6 years ago, we established the Operation Vulindlela in the presidency, working together with Treasury to accelerate reforms in a number of areas. In our electricity, which as we all know was challenged, in logistics, in telecommunications, in water, and also in the visa system. Yesterday we were launching the electronic travel authorization at OR Tambo, just to enable people who want to visit our country to come in with ease, to sit wherever they are, either in Mumbai or in Shanghai or wherever, deeper parts of China, or wherever they are, or in Timbuktu, on our continent, and apply for a visa rather than travel all the way to our embassies that are far away. Apply for a visa where they are, they get approval, they get their visa, they travel to South Africa with great certainty that they will be allowed to come in. And they get to the gate, 1 minute later they're in the country, because we've now developed this very smart and South African developed system that allows our people to move in quicker, or tourists to move in quicker and more efficiently. So these are the reforms that we identified to boost our economy, but more importantly, in the industrial sector, manufacturing sector, and all that. Now, for the metals and engineering industries, few reforms are more important than those underway in electricity. Working together, we have succeeded in bringing load shedding to an end. There is still load reduction that's still stuck, particularly in many parts of our country because of illegal connections. But in the main, load shedding has gone. This is a major achievement, but reliability alone is not enough. Electricity must also be affordable. For energy-intensive industries, electricity prices have become an existential challenge. And in fact, we've had many of your counterparts coming forward to say that unless something is done, they are going to close, and thousands of people are going to lose jobs. It is precisely over a challenge such as that. Over the past 2 decades, electricity tariffs have increased far faster than inflation itself. You all know that. And in some cases, your electricity charge is much higher than even your labor charge. A number of smelters and other energy-intensive operations have either closed or reduced production or face the prospect of closure. These are not industries that can simply be switched off today and restarted tomorrow. Once a smelter closes, we lose productive capacity in our country, we lose skills, we lose export earnings, we weaken entire industrial value chains, and we lose jobs. That is why the next phase of electricity reform must now focus us not only on security of supply, which we've been working on, but also on reducing the cost of electricity. That must now be our focus. You may recall that we used to be one of the lowest cost electricity producers some years ago. And in fact, for us to have built a number of smelters, including one that we built in Mozambique, Mozal, was because we were producing electricity at a very low cost. We've now become the most expensive, if not one of the most expensive. We're now moving towards a competitive electricity market in which multiple generators will compete to supply electricity, meaning that we have now gone past just the efficient generation. We now must move to an era where there is competition which will help to bring down prices. The South African wholesale electricity market is expected to begin operating next year. Competition between producers, that is generators, combined with expanded transmission capacity and continued investment in new generation must ultimately produce a more efficient electricity system and put downward pressure on the cost of power. The reforms implemented through the Energy Action Plan have already unlocked unprecedented investment in new generation capacity. The Northern Cape could never have seen more than 100 billion rand being invested in that arid part of our country with a population that's far less than other provinces. But they have, because they have this wonderful resource given to them by Providence, that they have radiation that is equal to no other place in the world. Because of the reforms that we have inaugurated, they have been able to harvest that resource and utilize it to generate electricity. But a competitive electricity market also requires a transmission system that is independent, efficient, and capable of providing fair access to all market participants. That is why we have established the ESCOM Restructuring Task Team to oversee the detailed work that is required to establish a fully independent state-owned transmission company. Now, people often become very critical and they say, we are selling the national silver. We're selling the state assets. We're privatizing. We're not privatizing anything, particularly when it comes to the electricity sector. What we are doing is to restructure Eskom so that Eskom becomes much more competitive, and we bring in other players, as we have already. And in fact, when people begin complaining about this, I even say to them, if you have solar on your roof, which I have, you have become an Eskom because you are generating electricity from a free resource. You're generating electricity, and one of the reasons, or two of the reasons why you're generating electricity is reliability. When Eskom was going through its load shedding era, you became frustrated and you wanted reliable energy. Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, what you're also doing, you're seeking to reduce your costs. And if you look at your electricity bill as an individual consumer, you'll find that during the day, you are utilizing solar, and it is only at night when you shift to utilize the grid. Now you are balancing your costs factors. And that is why we moved in that direction. So Eskom remains a state-owned enterprise. It now has competition from you. Your Eskom, I don't know number what. We have how many households in South Africa? 18 million or so. You're one of those households. Not all households, of course, generate electricity, but you're one of those households. I generate electricity. I'm an Eskom. I utilize the sun, and I've reduced my cost of electricity, which makes my wife very happy. And I'm still connected to Eskom. So Eskom still gets slightly less money from me than the past, but it's good for me. It's good for me as a consumer, but I now have reliability. Eskom continues to be owned by government. We have not privatized it. All we have done is to introduce other generators, myself, and a whole number of other generators have now come into the market. And I always say to them, do you remember the days when Telkom was the only telecommunications provider in the country? Elias, those days you could not call your grandmother in the rural areas. But today your grandmother can pick up the phone and call you. She couldn't because Telkom had not been able to spread the telephone lines to the rural areas, to all parts of South Africa. When we opened the market to bring in other mobile players, all of a sudden, your grandmother can now call. What have we done? We brought in competition. Has that killed Telkom? No. The government still owns Telkom. We own about 40% of Telkom. And Telkom has become competitive. It is now competing head-to-head with the mobile operators, and in some cases is even beating them. They have greater capability in other areas. Similarly, we say, so what has that done? It has reduced our telco costs, brought them down. We're no longer relying on one. And competition is good in our own lives and in what we are offered as services generally. It is good because it gives you choice. You focus on what matters to you. Is it reliability? Is it cost? That is what we've now done. Eskom continues to be owned by government. We take transmission lines out of Telkom, Eskom rather, and it stands as a standalone entity to build the transmission lines. Eskom currently is burdened with a huge debt. It is unable to build as the 14,000 kilometers of transmission. The lenders will not give it money. You set up a separate one which is 100% owned by government, because government must continue from a security point of view, because transmission line is about sovereign security. So government must continue to own that, to regulate it and all that. But in order for all other generators, like me, if I produce excess electricity, I want to put it on the grid, on the transmission lines, and I'd like that to be controlled by another entity, not my competitor, because Eskom has now become my competitor. But I use Eskom, so I'm its customer, but I'm its competitor. So that is the reforms that we are bringing through. The energy transition must become an industrial transmission. South Africa should not simply import the technologies required for the new energy company. Now, in the end, your industry is the one that is going to help us build these 14,000 kilometers, which we have to build, of transmission lines. The National Transmission Company of South Africa, NTSA, will then expand the transmission lines it has. It takes on the assets, it pays Eskom the value of what Eskom has done for the nation to install. And Eskom then continues, strengthen its capability, get into other areas, renewables, nuclear, and what have you, becomes the gigantic energy company that it has always meant to be. Where we have capability or can realistically develop it, we should be able here in our country to be able to develop and build this transmission line. Our renewable energy program can support domestic production, the production of towers, transformers, cables, switch gears, structural steel, and other electrical equipment. And you are the sector that is meant to do that. Our mineral endowment gives us an opportunity also to move further into green metals and mineral beneficiation. And you stand at the center of it all. Our engineering capabilities position us to participate in emerging industries such as battery, manufacturing, and green hydrogen. I have a massive battery that powers my solar. And the person who installed it, he says, Mr. President, did you know that this battery was made here in South Africa? And it is one of the best that we have, and this company is now exporting these batteries. A massive battery like that made here in South Africa. That gave me joy, because it means that the heartbeat of steel manufacturing is still there in our country. And nowhere is the industrial opportunity more immediate than in the expansion of our electricity transmission network, our various other components of electrical proficiency. Over the coming decades, South Africa needs around, as I said, 14,000 kilometers of new transmission lines, and together with major investment in substations and transformation capacity. This is the largest transmission expansion program in our country's history. And think for a moment about what this means. Thousands upon thousands of transmission towers, hundreds of thousands of tons of fabricated steel, thousands of kilometers of conductors and cables, transformers, insulators, switchgear, substation equipment, foundations, control systems, engineering services, transport and logistics. And all of these connected with your sector. And behind every one of these products are factories, are workers, are engineers, artisans, and suppliers. This should become one of the great industrial projects of our generation. Much as it has to be done over the next 10 years, once capability is there and the financing component is there, and we're now crunching the numbers on the financing, this is going to inject enormous capability amongst yourselves as players in this industry. South Africa already has significant capability in steel fabrication, in electrical equipment, distribution transformers, and power transformers, as I was saying about the battery that now powers my solar. We must use the transmission program deliberately to rebuild and expand this capability. We should not find ourselves 10 years down the line with a vastly expanded transmission grid but a diminished domestic manufacturing capability. That would represent a missed historic opportunity. The transmission program must therefore become both an industrialization program and a national skills program. It will require engineers, it will require electricians, it will require welders and boilermakers from yourselves. I digress for a moment. I visited Sasol the other day and was just gobsmacked with what I saw. And in a massive industrial complex, and I'm sure many of your companies have done work for Sasol because it is so big. But it was a joy to see how the workers developed the skills from being welders, from being engineers, from the various disciplines that they have. And young black, white, women workers involved in industrial capability of enormous proportions. I was deeply impressed. And then I knew that here in our country we have a capability perhaps that is second to none on our continent. And this is what we need to deepen, to broaden, and to exploit. What we are now exploding upon will require toolmakers, technicians, designers, project managers, and construction workers. It must create apprenticeships and training opportunities for thousands of young South Africans, and it must provide opportunities for established manufacturers like yourselves, alongside black industrialists, women and youth-owned enterprises working together, as well as small and medium enterprises. The same principle must apply to our logistics reforms. Through Operation Vulindlela, we are undertaking the most far-reaching reform of South Africa's freight logistics system in decades. Multiple train operating companies are gaining access to the freight rail network. And keep saying the rail itself continues to belong to the government. What we are concessioning is the utilization and the improvement and the development of the line. For a set number of years, companies can invest, can improve, so that we focus on movement of goods. And I often tell people about the N3 concession, that government didn't have the money, but it concessioned the N3, and indeed the N1, and indeed the N4, and said, you come in, bring your capital, build this road, maintain it, and it has become the real economic lifeline in our country, those three roads. Now, for those who say government is privatizing, there's no privatization, it's concession. You use other people's money, who also want to make money, by the way, to make things happen. The legislative and institutional framework for rail reform is being modernized. We're modernizing that, we're making that a lot better. Significant private investment will be required to restore locomotives, wagons, signaling systems, rail infrastructure, and terminal capacity. And all this is happening because the government does not have all the money. The government spends most of its money on social welfare, on looking after our people, and making sure that we reverse the vestiges of poverty that apartheid bequeathed on our people. Again, this represents an industrial opportunity. South Africa once possessed formidable capacity in rail engineering and rail equipment manufacturing. We must rebuild them, and this is where your industry plays a role. We should be manufacturing more of the locomotives, the wagons, the wheels, the axles, signaling equipment, and components required by our rail system. The same applies to our ports. Significant investment is being directed towards port infrastructure, cranes, handling equipment, and terminal modernization as we advance reforms in the port system. And the same applies to our water system, which we are now also reforming. Integrated steelmaking, mining, manufacturing, and virtually every productive sector depend on reliable supplies of industrial water. We've therefore embarked on a fundamental reform of the water sector. We recently published the National Water Action Plan, whose implementation will be coordinated through the National Water Crisis Committee that I set up. There are running complaints in the country that I set up commissions, I set up committees, I do all these things. And what I'm really good at is to bring people together. Bring people together to work together, just like what Elias is doing. He brings you all together to a breakfast. Can't be anything wrong with that. We are putting into operation the South African National Water Resource Infrastructure Agency. Through national grants alone, government is investing approximately 24 billion a year in municipal water and sanitation infrastructure, and hundreds of projects underway across the country now. This also affects your work because you work in municipalities, and this is where your processes of manufacturing are affected negatively because the municipal entity in the area where you worked does not have the capability, does not have the water and all that. So we are rebuilding all that. Further investment is being mobilized through public-private partnerships and new financing mechanisms. Once again, this means demand for pipes, pumps, valves, treatment equipment, structural steel, engineering services, and construction materials. And this is your forte. When we consider transmission, rail, ports, and water, renewable energy, mining, social infrastructure, and defense together, we begin to appreciate the scale of the opportunity. The opportunity is immense, and it is just continuing to grow into a massive opportunity. Government's infrastructure program, as you heard me say, is around 1 trillion rand over the next 3 years. We should view this not simply as a construction program. We should view it as an industrial strategy. The central question is therefore, how much of this productive capacity requires to deliver the infrastructure that we should put in place to build South Africa? This does not mean that every nut, bolt, and component must necessarily be manufactured locally. However, nor should localization become a license for inefficiency. But localization must be competitive. It must meet the technical standards it must also deliver quality. And this is where you come in. It must deliver on time, but where South African firms can produce competitively, public investment should help create the scale as well as the certainty that enables them to invest. Industry repeatedly tells government that manufacturers cannot invest in new factories without visibility of future demand. That is a reasonable concern, I must say, and this is precisely what your chairman, Elias, was also saying. We therefore need to improve the coordination and also the publication of the infrastructure pipeline so that companies can have line of sight of what government and state-owned enterprises and other public institutions intend to procure over the next 5, 10, and even 15 years. And we are told, for instance, that the order book for a number of implements or equipment is quite congested. And unless you have a clear timeline of when you will need it, you will only get it much, much later. So we do need to start populating your order book so that you have in your own plans clear sight of when things will start happening. A manufacturer deciding whether to invest hundreds of millions of rands in a transformer factory, cable plant, or fabrication facility needs confidence that there will be an order book. Predictability, as your chairman was saying, creates investment. Investment creates capacity. Capacity then creates the jobs that we need. This is why the Steel and Metal Fabrication Master Plan remains important. Government will continue working with industry, with yourselves, and labor to address the structural challenges facing the steel value chain. The future of the metals and engineering sector is inseparable from the future of our steel industry. Steel is a strategic industry and has always been from time immemorial. And without steel, there is no industrial economy. And without steel, there is no real development in the economy. Even if you were to say you just want to focus on, things like AI and all that, AI requires data centers. Those data centers require steel, and they require energy. There are no transmission towers, there are no railway lines, there are no mines, and there are no factories. There can be no bridges, ports, or major water infrastructure without steel. Supporting a competitive and sustainable steel industry is therefore a national priority for us. And that is why when one of your key companies was facing real challenges, government did say, we're not going to allow this to fail. But support must go together with competitiveness. Our objective must be an industry that invests in modern technology, that improves productivity, that reduces its carbon intensity, produces consistently to international standards, and competes successfully in export markets as well. We must also deepen the domestic value chain. Where major equipment has to be imported, government will increasingly use instruments such as the National Industrial Participation Program and Supply Development Requirements to ensure that these purchases generate the benefits for the South African economy. Now, these benefits must include local investment, technology transfers, research as well as development, and must also involve supplier development, skills, and export opportunities. Now, around the world, as some of you will know, governments are taking steps to protect strategic industrial capabilities and secure critical supply chains. And in some cases, they often say it's too big to fail. So therefore they make interventions. That it's too important to fail, and then they make interventions. South Africa cannot be indifferent to the unfair trade practices. At the same time, we must recognize that downstream manufacturers also depend on competitively priced products or inputs. Our trade policy must therefore strike a very careful balance. We must protect efficient domestic producers against unfair competition, whilst ensuring that downstream manufacturers are not penalized where domestic supply is unavailable, inadequate, or uncompetitive. Now, the work being undertaken by the International Trade Administration Commission, ITAC, on steel tariffs and rebates is intended to achieve precisely this balance. Trade measures alone, however, cannot secure the future of South African manufacturing. Ultimately, our manufacturers must know that they must compete. They must compete on price, they must compete on quality, and they must compete on technology. And in the end, they must be efficient in delivery as well, as many of your companies are. Government's responsibility is to create the conditions in which you are able to do so. This means reliable and affordable energy, as we were talking about earlier, efficient railways and ports, reliable water, modern infrastructure, access to finance, appropriate trade measures, predictable regulation, where you often criticize us, and a skilled workforce. Industry has responsibilities as well. We need companies that are willing to invest. We need companies that are prepared to modernize their factories. We need companies that are up to scale with regard to improving productivity. We need companies that will develop local suppliers. And we need companies that embrace transformation, that know that transformation is the order of the day. When I visited Sasol, I began in my head to contrast Sasol with a number of other companies that exist in our marketplace. What I saw in Sasol was a transformed company, a company that has enabled the empowerment of women, that women play a critical role. You never used to find that in South African industries. All you ever found was just men only. And as I looked at the women, both black and white, they were wearing their overalls, they were getting into the belly of the big machines. They come out with oil, water on their heads. They say, we are doing the work. And I saw a company that has employed a very mixed cadreship, a cohort, I must call it, cohort of top executives, middle executives, top executives of both black and white and women. White women, black women, colored, Indian, you name it. A complete, beautiful Madiba's rainbow cohort in the company. But when I go to other companies in our country, I don't see that. I don't see that transformative sort of display. And I've often wondered, why is it that other companies can do it and not all? Is it will? Is it drive? And I asked the CEO, I said, how did you achieve this? He says, it was intentional. Intentional because, he said, Mr. President, we employ all these rainbow people, and we therefore need to infuse them in the various structures of our company. And he confidently said, Sasol is truly transformed. and I saw it myself. But when I go to other companies, I just see a one-dimensional cohort, and I often wonder, we are a diverse nation. Why is it not happening elsewhere? So transformation then becomes one of the key areas that we drive. Why is that so? To extract the juice of capability from everyone, to extract the capability, the wisdom, the intellectual capacity that everyone has to give. So for generations, our country has really been great at training people. Let's use those people that we train. We've trained artisans, really outstanding artisans that are in demand in other parts of the world. They tell me when you go to the Middle East, you'll meet all manner of artisans from South Africa. So let's train them and let's bring them back, because they have produced skills such as fitting, turning, electricians, boiler makers, welders, millwrights, and tool makers. They are there, we have produced them. Many of these skills subsequently spread throughout our economy and somehow throughout the world. We need to rebuild that training culture, that every company must have a strong training culture. Like various successful countries in the world or companies in the world, they spend up to 10% of their revenue on R&D. And I'm saying, yes, R&D, but also training. We must train our people. Every major infrastructure contract should therefore ask not only how many kilometers of railway or transmission line we will build. It should ask how many apprentices will be trained, how many artisans will qualify, and how many young engineers, both men and women, will gain experience. How many local suppliers will be deployed, or developed rather, and how much new manufacturing capacity will remain in South Africa when the project is completed. This is how infrastructure investment becomes industrial development. And our ambitions cannot end at South Africa's borders. The long-term future of South African manufacturing depends on exports. And the Africa Continental Free Trade Area is creating a market of more than 1 billion people. All the 54 countries we have on our continent. Across our continent, countries are building cities, railways, power stations, transmission, networks, mines, factories, and as you might not know, South Africa is the biggest investor on the African continent. No other country gets close to the investment that we put on the continent. So we need to follow that investment with the capability that we build here. We will require precisely the products and capabilities that are represented in this room to be exported. So our country should aspire to become the engineering workshop of the African continent. We're the only country that has the industrial capability and might that this country has. We should be exporting transformers to the continent and batteries, as I was saying earlier. We should be exporting mining equipment. We should be as we are already exporting railway equipment. We should be exporting pumps, valves, fabricated steel and electrical equipment, and we should be exporting South African engineering expertise. And government will continue to support exporters through trade negotiations, export promotion, trade facilitation, and industrial financing. So ladies and gentlemen, for many years we've spoken about the decline of South Africa's manufacturing capabilities. We must now speak about its renewal. The opportunity is immense before us. The reforms we have undertaken in electricity, in logistics, in water are beginning to change the conditions under which our economy operates. And they're beginning to make our country more attractive to the inflow of capital and finance. Our infrastructure program is creating a substantial pipeline of demand. The energy transition is creating entirely new industries, and the continental free trade area is opening a vast market on our doorstep. We must bring these opportunities together into a new program of industrialization. From now on, all we must be talking about is industrialization. And even as we look at towns that have really downscaled, I mean, whether it's on the East Rand, in the Kuruleni, whether it's on the West Rand, near Sasolburg or wherever, we must look at them as towns that must, and factories that must now be revived. Government must provide certainty, yes. We must remove constraint, yes. We must become less bureaucratic, yes. We must coordinate infrastructure investment and use public procurement strategically and responsibly. But industry must invest, it must innovate, it must compete, it must transform and train. Labor must be our partner in building productive workplaces, developing skills, and ensuring that workers share in the benefits of industrial growth. If we do these things together, South Africa can once again become a country that makes things, a country that manufactures the equipment for our own development, a country that transforms its minerals into higher value products. It is eminently possible. A country that exports machinery, engineering expertise to the world. And most importantly, we can become a country that creates millions of productive jobs for our people. For real jobs are to be found in those key productive industries. We have the minerals, we have the infrastructure base, we have the engineering capability, we have the industrial experience, and we have the entrepreneurs, and here you are all. And we have a generation of young people who are eager, hungry for opportunity, for skills and opportunity. What is required now is that we bring these strengths together and let us build the transmission lines that we must build. Because if we don't build those transmission lines, we are going to face the mother of all load shedding experiences again. Because right now the grid is full and it needs to be expanded so that the renewable energy constructors or generators are then able to put the new energy that they are generating onto the grid. So let us build those transmission lines. We should be able to rebuild our railways, which we are doing. We should modernize our ports, which we are busy doing. We should secure our water infrastructure, which we are working on fervently. But as we build them, we should also rebuild South African industry. And this is who you are. Let us make this infrastructure program the foundation of a new era of industrialization in our country. And we must produce more in South Africa, and we should also export more from South Africa. And we should create jobs, we should build industries, we should develop capabilities that will sustain our economy for generations to come. So I'm confident that if we continue working together, we can build an industrialized economy worthy of South Africa's immense potential. And this is what the future portends. And this is where we should go. And yes, Elias, the timelines then become more evident. The timelines are then well set out. And everybody then knows that as we build this capability, these projects come on stream, and this is when they come on stream, and our destination is to ensure that we conclude everything we do. So thank you very much. It's good to be among steelmakers. As I walked in, I got a sense, each time I walk into rooms. Usually I go to conferences that are where many of the people who attend are money people. And as I walk in, I often say, I smell money because they're money people. I just smell it. I've developed my sense of smell. But now, when I walked in here, I saw everybody seemed to be as cold as steel. As cold as steel. And I asked myself, what am I smelling? I said, I want to be smelling factories. I want to be smelling, fabricators. I couldn't decipher it. It's only now that I see that indeed there are steel makers here. Thank you.